Well, good morning. Welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and I very much hope we're not going to go all stuttery this morning. The music intro didn't play very well there, so I hope the audio from the mic is actually coming over reasonably clearly. A fairly busy show for you this morning. Again, we'll be having a very quick look at the riots that happened in Swansea after the death of two youths on an electric motorcycle. MAG are hosting a motorcycle theft public meeting at the Ace Cafe with Hertfordshire Police. Insurers have pulled out of bike training in New Zealand, and the Diavel from Ducati is on recall. We'll also have a quick look at a classic Matchless, which somebody went looking for. It was a bike there farther road, and it turned up in a fire service collection. Body kits are coming for the Yamaha XSR 900. Electric car charging turns groovy with Kerbo Charge, and I'll explain what all that's about later on the show. And we'll also have a quick look at the question of whether it's illegal to throw grass into the road after you've mown your lawn. That cropped up actually in an American video. So settle yourselves down while we go through all that. We'll finish off with today's discussion point, the battle for resources for EVs and why that matters. Right, okay, so got a couple of comments here. Sounds okay, says Helen. Thanks very much for that. And Christine's here as well. Good morning to you both. Right, glad the mic's coming over clearly. Don't know what the problem with the audio is. It's the same audio I play every single week. So what that particular problem was, I don't know. Anyway, right, okay, let's carry on with the show then. Well, last Sunday I had a very pleasant day out with Judy as we drove up to Ely. Unfortunately, I would have liked to have taken the bike because it was a lovely day, but it would have been a bit too taxing on Judy's knee to do that particular journey there and back. We visited the old Fenland pumping station at Prickle Willow, and it just happened to be holding an open day, so you could see the machinery working, but also they were hosting a classic bike gathering too. So we did the exhibition at the pumping station. It's not a big one, but basically it tells the story of how the Fens developed in geological time, and it also filled in a few blanks for me about how that actually happened, and then there was a sort of the history of the Fenland from the days when it was a no-go land. If you know anything about, I think, who was it, Hereward the Wake, wasn't it, if I remember correctly, and right through till the sort of 1700s when they started to try to drain them. As for the motorcycles, I do like to see classic machines out and about and actually in use. It's fantastic to go and see bikes in a museum. I was lucky enough in New Zealand to go and look at one of a big collection of cars and vintage bikes out there, but it's something else to see them actually being ridden to and from events like this, quite frankly. Now, some of the bikes were in near mint condition, but most showed the wear and tear of time and use, which I think is entirely reasonable. So at the end of the show, I've put some photos I took together into a short movie. Not exactly studio quality photos, they're snaps on the phone, but I think it'll be interesting. So that'll close out the show today, so do stay tuned. And before I crack on with the news, just a quick reminder that last Thursday I launched a new series of my sort of short informative videos. This series is called 60 Seconds Science, and the idea is to take quickfire looks at the crucial role that science and scientific principles play as we ride motorcycles, because the fact is, from the moment we sit on the bike and turn on the ignition, science is all around us. Now, we don't need to be Einstein to understand how science works, but it sometimes works with us and sometimes against us, so it it is worth taking just a little time to get to understand a bit of science better. So as always, the more we know, the better we go. So tune in for 60-second science. Those will be going out on Thursdays, my usual day for videos. And tomorrow I will feature the science of statistics, basically, because what I'll be trying to tackle is whether or not motorcycling is dangerous. So, right, on with the news from the last few days. So the first story of the day is a very disturbing one, really, because it involves the events in Swansea. Now, what happened is that two teens who were riding a Suron electric motorcycle died in a road accident on Monday evening, and the allegations are that they were being chased by police, according to local residents. Now, the allegation was initially denied by both police and Alan Michael, who is the South Wales Police and Crime Commissioner, who was quoted as saying rumours became rife of a police chase, and saying that this wasn't the case. Now, Mr. Michael told BBC's Radio 4 Today programme, quote, "It would appear that there were rumours, and those rumours became rife of a police chase, which wasn't the case. And I think it illustrates the speed with which rumours can run around with the activity that goes on social media nowadays, and that events can get out of hand." Now, the police force themselves said that the collision involving the two teens on the electric bike had already occurred when officers arrived, and that the police remained on the scene to manage what they described as large-scale disorder until the early hours of Tuesday morning. Now, the events that happened in Swansea, it was Cardiff, wasn't it? Not Swansea. The events were actually live streamed on YouTube, and they showed people throwing fireworks, other missiles at a line of police with riot shields that looked like fire bombs were also thrown. Two vehicles were set on fire and they were burned out. Now, the South Wales Police said that there were no police vehicles on Snowdon Road, where the crash was, at the time it happened. But yesterday afternoon, the BBC showed what they described as verified CCTV footage, which the BBC says, quote, "appears to show a police van following two people on an electric bike minutes before a fatal crash that sparked a riot in Cardiff." Now, the video itself was timestamped to 17:59 BST on Monday, and the bike and a police van both passed this camera, which was on Frank Road in Ely, Cardiff, just over half a mile away from the scene of the fatal crash. Now, on Tuesday evening, Chief Superintendent Martin Stone made a statement outside Cardiff Bay Police Station in which he said, quote, "We have received footage that shows a police vehicle following a bike just prior to 6 p.m. He said that the footage, quote, "will assist us in piecing together the circumstances leading up to the collision." Now, the force has made a mandatory referral of itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and that was confirmed by Chief Superintendent Stone. So some very disturbing events going on out there in Cardiff. Okay, in other news, the Motorcycle Action Group, or MAG, have announced that the Ace Cafe on London's North Circular Road, not too far away from here actually, is to be the venue for the next in a series of public meetings aimed at raising the profile of the fight against motorcycle theft. Now, it seems, I missed this, but previous meetings have been held in Gillingham in Kent and in Birmingham to meet with the Kent and the West Midlands police forces, and the Hertfordshire Fight Motorcycle Theft public meeting at the Ace Cafe is going to take place on Wednesday the 14th of June from 6 p.m. onwards, and attendees will get the chance to meet both the Hertfordshire Police and Crime Commissioner David Lloyd and Chief Inspector Ricky Bartlett. And MAG's Director of Campaigns and Political Engagement will also be on hand. That's Colin brown, for those of you who don't know. Now, mags say that the previous meetings in Kent and the West Midlands have seen tangible outcomes, although they don't say exactly what those are, and the hope is that this meeting will be equally effective. And so basically it's open to anybody who wishes to find out more about the work of Hertfordshire Police and to ask questions and raise concerns. There's another date set too for a meeting with West Yorkshire Police. That'll be held on June the 24th in Leeds, but there are no details available on the venue to me just yet. So if you are from Hertfordshire and you want to talk to your police and crime commissioner and the police team and on the topic of motorcycle theft, then Wednesday 14th of June at the Ace Cafe on the North Circular Road is the place to be. I might see if I can pop along to that myself if I'm not doing anything. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you want to catch these shows, they go out Wednesdays and Sundays as a rule. There was a slight blip as Sunday's show went out Monday, but generally speaking that's when they will go out, usually live, occasionally recorded, and if you miss any you can always catch up on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK on the end, or you will find somebody sharpening Boy Scouts with a horse's hoof or something. Right, okay, so if theft is a big problem, Northern Ireland has what seems to be an even more pressing problem at the moment, which actually threatens the existence of motorcycling in the country altogether, because it seems that insurers are now refusing to cover the training bikes used by motorcycle instructors and motorcycle training schools. That they say the same companies are actually still providing cover on the mainland, but not for some reason in Northern Ireland. Now, according to data supplied by MAG Northern Ireland, there are 30 motorcycle training schools in Northern Ireland, and they say that some are one-man bands, single operator businesses, others employ up to a dozen or more instructors and other staff, so they're fairly big concerns. Mags also say there are no less than 528 registered approved motorcycle instructors, and all of these businesses and individuals will face a loss of livelihood if training schools can't operate and individuals can't work as trainers. Now, there is a report that a large unnamed school actually faces closure next month, presumably because their existing policy runs out and they can't get replacement cover. The company closing will obviously impact on the numbers of riders who can get trained to actually ride on the roads in Northern Ireland. And as more schools close down, there will be an increasing impact on how riders get to pass their CBT, let alone how they're going to train under supervision to take a test on a bigger bike. Now, Martin Boyd, the regional MAG rep, says that even his wife is actually being affected by this, and he says, quote, "She'd been riding a Piaggio MP3 some years and decided to take her full bike test. She bought a bike to learn on, but has sold it because her instructor has had to close the business. She's now returning to the MP3 as she can ride that on a car licence." He says that he and others have approached the insurance industry and their representative body for an explanation as to what's going on, and have asked for a reconsideration of their decisions to cease to cover motorcycle training, but he says they have been cold-shouldered. Martin continues, "I've enlisted the help of elected representatives, including Ian Paisley, the chair of the all-party Parliamentary Committee on Motorcycling, and all have been rebuffed or simply ignored, and the government couldn't care less, disdaining our approaches without even polite acknowledgement. It's surely unacceptable that motorcyclists in Northern Ireland are so blatantly discriminated against in such a way. When buying insurance for your bikes, I ask you to remember that those companies treating us in this way are the assassins who are strangling motorcycling in an entire UK region. Now, unfortunately, none of us can ride without insurance, and I too have personally had significant issues in obtaining business use cover here on the mainland. So it's not simply affecting Northern Ireland, although it seems that the situation has been taken to the ultimate extreme of stopping insurance cover altogether. Is this a sign that insurers are re-evaluating their position regarding motorcycle insurance in general? I don't know, but it's pretty clear that insurance companies hold far too much power in their hands when they can make a unilateral decision like this and simply cease to cover motorcycle training. Something, as they say, needs to be done. Right, okay, on to the travails of Norton. Now, despite the cash from the India-based TVS motorcycles, the rebirth of Norton isn't proceeding entirely without bumps along the path. Now, you'll probably recall that Norton was bought as the company fell into administration. That was in 2020 by the Indian motorcycle manufacturer TVS, and they announced big plans. They were going to inject 100 million into the company, and that would fund a new factory. It would relaunch the brand, and it would also invest in the re-engineering and the relaunch of the V4 superbike that Norton had built as a flagship, and also the twin-cylinder motorcycles too. Unfortunately, the latest figures reveal that Norton Motorcycles have actually posted a £29 million loss in the financial year to March, and that's doubled from the previous year's losses. On the good side, sales were up 10 times, but it said that the revenue from motorcycle sales only amounted to £370,000. So as you can see, there's a significant shortfall there. The expenses are sort of outstripping income by at least 10 times there. So why is this? Well, sales of new motorcycles only began in the second half of the previous financial year, so basically towards the end of the summer last year. Because, well, one reason was that the V4S had to be entirely re-engineered and required hundreds and hundreds of changes, and the creation of a supply chain to produce parts for that bike, and production generally has also been hit by the same supply chain challenges that have hit motorcycle manufacturers worldwide. Electrical parts, you'll probably recall, chips and things have been in short supply, and even Honda and Harley Davidson have had to put their production lines on hold whilst they restock. So what's been going on? Well, so far it seems TVS, the company accounts reveal that TVS have pumped in £74 million of the 100 million promised into Norton to fund the motorcycle manufacturer's re-establishment as a going concern. So I don't think TVS are going to back out of this one anytime soon, but clearly there is a way to go, and as I said a few weeks ago, a few shows back, there must be questions about whether or not Norton can sell enough of these very top-end premium bikes to make any money, and whether in fact Norton needs to start thinking about a more affordable model that can sell in more volume. Now, another bike which has sold in small quantities, because it is pretty damned expensive, is the Ducati Diavel. But Ducati have announced that they have a recall out on that particular model, and they're warning owners that the right and or left side pillion foot pegs, which you'll recall that passengers will normally stand on when they want to mount the machine and sit on it, may actually snap off at the swivel joint. The recall says this could happen when mounting the motorcycle, which wouldn't be very nice for who was ever standing on it at the time, or it could come off whilst the bike is in motion, which would obviously pose a risk to whoever's sitting on the back seat at the time, but also it would pose a risk to other people around the bike, because frankly I wouldn't like to have a footrest bouncing through my windscreen or hitting me as I was walking or cycling down the road. So, on to some cheerier news after those fairly depressing stories. The search for a bike by the man whose son, so again, I'll start that sentence again. The search by the son of a man who rode a Matchless G3L as a dispatch rider for the Auxiliary Fire Service in Cornwall in the early 1960s has turned up the actual bike that he rode. Now, Mark Barnicott and his mother Elaine were looking through some old photos shortly after her husband Roy had passed away in 2021, and they found one of him with this particular machine, and Elaine remembered how much he loved the bike, and Mark decided he would try and see if it was still around from the registration number which appeared on the photo. Now, it turned out that the bike was still registered, and that led Mark to begin a deeper dig into where the bike might be, and he actually found it photographed on display at the Sandbach Transport Festival. Now, Mark then contacted the organiser, and he helped Mark to discover that the bike is now part of a heritage fleet which is owned by Cheshire Fire and Rescue Services. So he contacted the Chester station manager at 1 Andy Gray, who actually invited the family up to see the bike in Cheshire. And so we do have a photograph of that. There it is. Let's zoom in a little bit, and you can see the bike there with the family on board. Mark said, after they made the trip up last month, I couldn't believe it when I found it still registered. I thought it would be long gone, so I'm happy to see it still going strong. It looks really well cared for and still in its original condition, which is amazing. I'm just sad Dad didn't get to see it. He'd have loved talking about his days in the Auxiliary Fire Service and how he rode the Matchless in action as part of his role. So firefighter Zach Burns said the chance of ever tracing the history of a vintage vehicle is pretty slim, so it's lovely to know where this bike started its life and who rode it in the early 1960s. It's a cherished part of our fleet, so knowing the history now makes it extra special to us. The Matchless is a 350cc machine. It was built to Home Office specifications and painted green. They were used to escort the famous Green Goddess fire engines, and Roy was stationed at Seaview Road Station in Falmouth, and due to the station being in such a remote location, his bike and his work was invaluable. I believe his service actually extended back into the Second World War. Anyway, what happened next? The bike was actually purchased by Cheshire Fire Road Safety Team because they were searching for a bike to use to engage with motorcyclists, but something a bit different from the bikes that other fire services use. Kent, for example, had a Fireblade. I don't know if they've still got it. I've seen Ducatis, I've seen BMWs, all logoed up as fire bikes. So this is something a little bit different, isn't it? The motorcyclists seem to be engaging with it well, and the Matchless is to be seen at station open days and at events across the country. Right, don't forget, if you can support the show, I'm mighty grateful to you. If you buy me a cuppa, it helps keep them coming, helps fund the hours of research I actually do to put one of these shows out to you. But you get a benefit too. You get access to hundreds of the better biking articles online. I know that many of you who do watch the show do support what I'm doing here. So if you are a new watcher and you'd like to give me a hand to bring them out, please drop me a coffee over there at coffee.com. Right, okay, a couple of comments here. Terry's here. Good morning, Terry. Nice to see you. He says, little doubt insurance companies are intent on slanting the risk odds in their favour. Well, yeah, they've got to make money. And, you know, if motorcycling puts them at risk of losing money, then they need to do something about it. But to stop insuring a training school, which is probably one of the lowest risk ways of riding a motorcycle there is a bit bonkers to me. And Terry also has a comment on the Norton story. He says you'd have to be a brave investor to throw millions of pounds or dollars at an unproven bespoke bike design of that unit cost. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, but TVS are not the smallest company in the world by any stretch of the imagination. They have a big portfolio of bikes back in India. They are one of the biggest motorcycle manufacturers in the world, so yeah, they have some cash. Right, anyway, on with the show. Now, Wise Gear, that is the letter Y apostrophe S. They seem to be Yamaha's own in-house customizing range. I hadn't actually heard of them before, but they've just announced a pair of kits which changed the look of Yamaha's Naked XSR 900. For some reason that always confuses me. I find it a particularly unpleasant acronym for a bike. But anyway, so what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at a body kit for this bike. I'm going to pop it up on screen. There we are. This is the Bloodline style kit, which is supposed to hark back to the 1980s GP racing scene. Now, personally, I think it looks rather more like the sort of typically mildly tarted RD350 LC of the early 1980s, and that just happens to remind me, of course, of another recent story I've run on the show, which is that Yamaha have claimed the RZ250, RZ350 trade names. So that may be a hint of about a smaller bike which might appear with something not dissimilar to this body kit on it. Anyway, coming back to the 900, the body kit comprises the fairing, which is presumably handlebar mounted, a replacement front mudguard, and the seat hump. The kit also appears to include restyled fuel tank and side panels, so you can see there's quite a lot of bolt-on stuff on this. The body kit comes in a range of original Yamaha colours. I've seen white and red in this photo, midnight black, also a classic blue livery, and I've also seen one in a grey, which I haven't seen confirmed as actually coming out, but I have seen a grey one. Now, you also get other bolt-on goodies with this Bloodline kit, and they include a tail tidy, which begs the question, why don't they make a tidier tail when they sell the bike as new? If the tail tidy is legal, why have to replace it with something lighter weight? I don't know. You get adjustable brake and clutch levers, which again begs the question, why aren't they on the bike already? A steering damper. That's interesting because I have to admit, when I rode a 2019 model over in New Zealand, I didn't find it the most stable of machines that I'd ever ridden. You also get a headlight grille, a radiator cover, and finally you get the almost obligatory Akrapovic exhaust system to add to the racket your bike will make. Now, not too surprisingly, with the tank and the exhaust in there, the kit is expensive. It will dent your wallet, likely to the tune of somewhere around about £4,200, £4,300. That's an estimate based on the yen cost of the kit, which has been touted in the press. Now, there's also a less expensive touring style kit, which gets the bodywork plus a rack, and you get saddlebags with it. You also, interestingly, get a lowering kit to reduce seat height, which also makes me think about the steering geometry change and whether it in fact makes the bike a little more stable. You get crash guards, presumably in case the stability issue isn't fixed, and a radiator cover, and you get heated grips for 2 days. 2 days, cold days. That comes in slightly less expensive at around £2,300, and both kits should be in dealers later this summer. Personally, I think the kits turn an unremarkable and slightly unbalanced looking bike in something that actually does float my boat. I always quite like the RD look, but hey ho. The only problem is that the XSR is already well north of £10,000 in UK dealers, and so even the cheaper body kit is going to put the price, sort of the ready to ride price, up to around £13,000, and that's a lot, frankly, to spend on changing the looks of what is already a brand new bike. So, alright, okay, I like to keep you abreast of what's going on in the world of electric vehicles, and of course one of the big problems is, how do you charge your electric vehicle if you only have on-street parking, as in fact I do, and if you don't have access to a nearby on-street charger, as in fact I don't. The nearest one is a good half-mile away, and it's of course got cars plugged into it. And of course the other problem is that if you do plug into an on-street charger, it costs you more than plugging into your own house electrical supply. So clearly running a 240 volt cable across the pavement is a bit of a risky solution. So it's not a trivial problem, because around 1/3 of UK homes do not have off-street parking where an EV can be safely charged. That's a huge number when you think about it. But there may be an answer from a UK startup called Kerbo Charge, who are offering what they describe as a self-closing cable channel that won't pose a trip hazard to pedestrians, and hopefully it won't be an open invitation to vandals to do something daft like cutting your cable either. So this is what it looks like. As you can see, the cable runs through a groove which is cut in the pavement, and you'll see that there is a sort of a ceiling strip which drops down over the top of the cable. So it's described as a shallow polymer channel recessed into the pavement, which has a self-closing lid that snaps down shut as the cable is inserted and removed, and fits flush with the pavement. So basically the channel also protects the cable and the channel from rain and debris. The company says it only takes 30 seconds to insert the cable into the channel and about 5 seconds to remove it. Now Kerbo Charge says that the channel needs to be put into pavement by an engineer who has to cut down through the top layer of tarmac to put it in place, although quite what happens if you have paving slabs outside the house, as I do here, I don't know. Now interestingly, installation is already available to anybody living on a private road, and Milton Keynes City Council have become the first council to actually approve roadside installations, and Kerbo Charge now working with other local authorities to try to get the system approved around the rest of the UK. So if you're not in Milton Keynes, you can register your interest to get priority fitting if and when the scheme becomes available in your area. However, there are of course some snags. The first one you can probably see for yourself. You still have to be able to park outside your property to use it. If you happen to live on a bit of road which has no parking, then you're in trouble. And of course, if somebody parks in your spot when you're not there, you're also going to struggle, aren't you? And frankly, it's not cheap, considering it's just a groove cut in the pavement and a bit of polymer with a sort of rubberized lid, which is a metre or so long. It costs a fairly whopping £999 to fit, although it does say that you have to obtain approval from the local council. You'll also need to install a domestic wall box, which is going to set you back another £1,000. That's the going rate for those, roughly speaking. So how much will it save you? Well, basically, if you are topping up at a public charger, it'll take you around 18 months at current prices to recoup the investment by using the cheaper nighttime tariff from your own house. Although company co-founder Michael Goulden says that Kerbo Charge offers cashback incentives for customers who share their charge points with other members of their community. Right, so interesting scheme, but one I suspect is not going to catch on. That'll be my guess. Okay, on to a sort of interesting bike safety problem here, actually. Spring's finally arrived. You probably noticed the weather's warmed up after a very wet March and fairly wet April. What's happened now, of course, is that the grass is growing at double the normal rate, and that means the lawnmowers are out. Everything from the old-fashioned push-along thing that a friend uses to trim their own pocket-sized lawn outside their London house, to ride-on mowers that trim the grass banks outside sizable rural properties. But what do you do with the grass? Well, when the grass gets cut here, some of it gets put in a compost bin, and as that gets filled up, the rest goes in a garden waste bin, which we actually pay for, and gets collected by the council and reprocessed and dealt with properly. But the trouble is that some people aren't quite so careful with what they do with the grass, and it seems that the same issues affect bikers in the US as they do in the UK, because recently a question from a motorcyclist gained airtime on a Kentucky TV channel, WKYT. So here's a transcript from the short segment. The presenter said, "As things warm up, you may see more motorcycles on the road. There's something you can do to help riders out." And then he read out what was described as today's good question from somebody called Larry. Larry said, "I ride a motorcycle and it's so dangerous when I come up on grass on the road. It's like hitting ice. Is it illegal to mow grass onto a roadway? If so, why aren't more people given tickets?" And the presenter gave him the answer, and he said, quote, "Larry, it depends where you live. There are some states where laws prohibiting hazardous materials on the roads could be used against people blowing their grass onto the street. Some communities in Kentucky have passed specific ordinances against it. It's a misdemeanor in the city of Murray, but there's no specific state law against blowing grass onto the road. There have been attempts to add grass clippings to Kentucky's criminal littering law for highways. The most recent was in 2020, but the bill didn't make it out of committee. Chances are people mowing grass into the road aren't aware it can be dangerous for motorcycle riders, so educating people about it might be the best path unless the laws are changed." I found that really quite interesting, actually, because this is the time of year when you are liable to come around the corner and find somebody tipping the mower bin out onto the road, thinking that that's a good way of getting rid of it because the cars will run over it and break it down. I've actually on several occasions stopped and had a polite word with somebody doing just that. One person actually was actually really very shocked to hear what I had to say about the road being made slippery, because he had absolutely no awareness that grass cuttings made the road slippery, not just for motorcycles, of course, but also for other vehicles too. And he was actually quite grateful that I'd taken the trouble to stop and tell him, and he apologised and said he'd go back to using his old compost bin. So there are some good results from engaging with people doing something which can potentially put us at risk. Right, now on to the final point for the day. Now, at the weekend, the leaders of the G7 countries, that's Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the US, excuse me, it's hay fever season again. All these regions have a demand for critical minerals to feed factories. And this, one of the things this gathering talked about is the need to manage risks to what they described as vulnerable mineral supply chains and to build more resilient sources. Now, the worldwide demand for minerals has been spurred very many apologies. So the switch to electric vehicles, the huge increase in the production of batteries has all required supplies of rare earth metals, amongst other things. Now, the Biden officials from the US agree that securing the supply of minerals needed to power electric vehicles is one of the United States' most pressing challenges. They say that the global supply of lithium alone needs to increase by 42 times by 2050 to meet the rising demand for electric vehicles. Now, innovations in battery technology, as I've talked about, could reduce the need for certain minerals. So lithium could be replaced by sodium, for example. But right now, the world is facing a dramatic long-term shortage. And the disruption caused by Europe's reliance on Russian energy has helped illustrate the danger of depending on third-party countries. Now, US President Joe Biden said on Saturday as he signed a partnership agreement with Australia to share information and coordinate standards and investment to create more responsible and sustainable supply chains. He said this is a huge step from our perspective, a huge step forward in our fight against the climate crisis. Now, Japan has signed a critical minerals deal with the US too. Europe is in the middle of negotiating one. Now, the problem is right now the world relies heavily on China for more than 80% of the supply of minerals. And that leaves other nations very vulnerable to political pressure from Beijing, which has a history of weaponizing supply chains in times of conflict. And given this statement on Saturday, it may not be entirely a coincidence that China's cyberspace regulator announced on Sunday that memory chips from US memory chip giant Micron Technology pose serious risks to their network security, and they've actually banned the firm's products from key infrastructure products. Now, it marks the deepening row between US and China over technology crucial to economies around the world. Washington is imposing its own measures targeting China's chip making industry, and also investing billions of dollars to boost America's semiconductor sector. And the US government has said it would work with allies to address what it called distortions of the memory chip market caused by China's actions. This action, along with recent raids and targeting of American firms, is inconsistent with China's assertions it's opening its markets and is committed to a transparent regulatory framework. And of course, across the globe, Chinese companies are also investing heavily in acquiring mines and refinery capacity globally. Now, the trouble for the West is that many of the mineral-rich nations, which are seen as potential partners to source these minerals and things from, they have pretty poor environmental and labour standards, and European officials have actually been pushing to establish common standards which suppliers will actually require from these countries. But of course, if China's not playing the game, that pushes the supply towards China. So there's a real problem here. There's always been a battle for the control of resources, and it's not surprising that the countries that produce these minerals are beginning to understand that they actually are in a strong position as suppliers. Now, Indonesia, which is seen as a country with lagging standards, and which also happens to be the world's biggest supplier of nickel, has actually been floating the idea of joining other resource-rich countries to create an OPEC-style producers' cartel. OPEC, you'll recall, controls a lot of the world's oil. And that would shift power from the consumers who buy it to the suppliers who produce it. And the nation has progressively stepped up restrictions on the export of raw nickel ore, with one step being to ensure that it's first processed in Indonesia. Now, Chile, which of course is a major producer of lithium, they've gone a step further. They've actually nationalised their lithium industry. That gives them a far better control over how the resources are developed and deployed than relying on third-party companies from foreign states. Bolivia and Mexico have taken the same step to gain full control over their resources. Now, how that will play out in terms of EV deployment and the timing of the decarbonisation of transport is going to be a very good question. Now, increasingly, I'm thinking that the UK and EU plans to ban ICE engines completely is looking increasingly difficult to implement. Where we go from there, who knows? I have no idea. But I do suspect that there might have to be some flexibility in timing. Right, that is it for today. Thank you once again for looking in. As always, I appreciate the time you spend watching Elevenses. If you are heading out today, I'm just looking out the window. It is a lovely sunny day out there again today, reasonably mild, so beautiful day for riding a bike. If you do head out on two wheels, make sure you stay shiny side up. And as I promised, here is a short video of the classic bikes at the Prick Willow meetup. So enjoy the video as you leave the show. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully see you on the next show on Sunday.